The high-frequency burst lasted only 0.7 seconds. A compressed packet of encrypted data, fired from a nondescript commercial van crawling through the southern industrial sprawl of Tehran, shot across the city towards a listening post hundreds of kilometers away. Inside the van, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and ozone from the humming electronics. The team leader, codenamed Ashkan, watched the progress bar on a ruggedized laptop. His face, illuminated by the green glow of the screen, was a mask of concentration. The data packet contained a single, stark message. Green light. Clock starts now. 6 hours, 29 minutes. He didn't look at the other two men in the back of the van. He didn't need to. They had rehearsed this moment 400 times in a full-scale replica of the target building, built in the Negev desert. Every movement was muscle memory. Every contingency was drilled into their minds. The driver, a local asset whose face Ashkan had never seen and never would, took a left turn, the van's worn suspension groaning in protest. The target was a warehouse, number 312, in a row of identical, forgotten-looking structures in the Shorabad district. An address that, to the world, meant nothing. But to the men in this van, and to the handful of people watching from a command center in Tel Aviv, it was the most important location on Earth. It housed Iran's entire nuclear weapons archive, the secret history of a program the regime swore did not exist. The van slowed, pulling to a stop in the deep shadow between two streetlights. The time was 22:30. The night was cold, the wind carrying the distant hum of the city and the smell of industrial chemicals. Ashkan and his two-man breach team, Rami and Barak, slid the side door open. No words were exchanged. They wore black fatigues, their gear making no sound as they moved. They carried heavy packs containing specialized tools forged for a single purpose. Rami, the team's technician, carried the plasma torch, a device capable of slicing through hardened steel as if it were butter. Barak carried the jamming equipment and counter-surveillance gear. They melted into the darkness, crossing an alleyway littered with debris. A stray cat watched them pass, its eyes glowing before vanishing. They reached the perimeter fence of the warehouse complex. It was a simple chain-link fence, but they treated it as if it were electrified and monitored. Barak knelt, pulling a handheld sensor from his pack. He scanned the fence line, his eyes fixed on the device's small screen. It measured electromagnetic fields, vibrations, and infrared anomalies. After a 10-second scan, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The fence was cold. No sensors. Just as the intel predicted. Ashkan produced a pair of hydraulic bolt cutters. There was no loud snap of metal. The jaws of the cutters were coated in a sound-dampening polymer. The metal of the chain link gave way, with a dull, soft thud. They were through the first layer. They moved low and fast, sticking to the shadows cast by the monolithic warehouses. Warehouse 312 looked exactly like its neighbors. Its corrugated metal facade was stained with rust, its large roll-up door dented and faded. To any casual observer, it was a derelict storage facility, probably full of rotting textiles or forgotten machinery parts. There was no visible security, no guards, no cameras. This was intentional. The best hiding place is the one that doesn't look like it's hiding anything. But the team knew better. Their intelligence, gathered over 2 years of painstaking work, told them the building was a fortress in disguise. The doors were reinforced. The walls contained a mesh of seismic sensors. The alarm system was a state-of-the-art model, connected directly to a nearby Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, Rapid Response Barracks. They had precisely 6 hours and 29 minutes before the morning guard shift change at 07:00. If they were 1 second late, a nationwide manhunt would begin while they were still inside the country. Ashkan glanced at his watch. 22:45. They were on schedule. Rami approached the small personnel door on the side of the building. He didn't touch it. He placed a small, circular device against the metal. It was a magnetic resonance scanner, a piece of technology that didn't officially exist. It hummed quietly, mapping the internal locking mechanisms of the door. The schematic appeared on his wrist-mounted display, 2 standard deadbolts, but also a magnetic lock rated for 1,200 pounds of force and a hardened steel bar on the interior. The real defense. Barak was already deploying the jammer. He placed a small tripod-mounted dish on the ground, aiming it at the roofline of the building where the alarm's transmitter was located. He typed a code into a keypad. A low-energy, multi-frequency wave of static washed over the building, blinding its electronic senses. The alarm was now deaf and dumb. It wouldn't just be silenced. Its internal logs would show no anomalies. As far as the security company was concerned, everything was normal. Ashkan looked at Rami, who pointed to the schematics on his wrist. He indicated the position of the internal steel bar. It was their main obstacle. Picking the locks would be useless if the bar was in place. But the intelligence had provided a solution for that too, a flaw in the building's design. Ashkan moved to the wall, right next to the doorframe. He produced a small, high-torque drill with a diamond carbide bit. The intel, provided by a high-level asset within Iran's Ministry of Defense, stated that when the warehouse was retrofitted, the contractors had cut a corner. The seismic sensors in the walls were not continuous. There was a 12-centimeter gap right here. Ashkan began to drill. The sound was minimal, a high-pitched whine that was swallowed by the night wind. He drilled a small, precise hole through the concrete. Then he inserted a fiber-optic borescope. The tiny camera fed an image to his eyepiece. He saw the interior of the warehouse wall, then the back of the steel door, and finally, the crude-looking but effective steel bar slid into heavy-duty brackets. It was exactly as the asset had described. He withdrew the borescope and inserted a new tool, a thin, flexible rod with a tiny, powerful hydraulic pincher at the end. He maneuvered it through the hole, his movements slow and deliberate. On his eyepiece, he watched the pincher approach the cotter pin that held the steel bar in its bracket. The pincher's jaws closed around the small piece of metal. Ashkan pulled gently. The cotter pin slid free. He then used the rod to push the main bar. It scraped loudly against its brackets, the sound unnerving in the silence. The bar slid clear. The door was now held only by the locks. The time was 01. The breach had begun. The operation, codenamed Project Ahmad, was not born in a moment of opportunity, but from a decade of mounting dread. The key player who set the mission in motion was Yossi Cohen, the director of Mossad. Cohen was a man known as the Model for his immaculate appearance, but his mind was a labyrinth of asymmetric warfare strategies. His signature achievement before this was the systematic dismantling of a foreign power's drone program, not through bombs, but by subtly corrupting their command and control software from the inside, causing the drones to crash or return to bases they didn't recognize. He brought to the table a philosophy of audacious, psychological warfare. He believed in operations that didn't just neutralize a threat, but demoralized the enemy by revealing their utter helplessness. For the Tehran mission, Cohen's skill was not in tactical planning, but in strategic vision. He saw the archive not just as intelligence, but as a political weapon to shatter the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, a deal he viewed as a catastrophic failure of Western imagination. His primary lieutenant for the operation was the head of Mossad's Caesarea division, the unit responsible for deploying operatives into the deepest and most hostile territories. Let's call him Gideon. Gideon was the opposite of Cohen. Where Cohen was a chess master moving pieces from above, Gideon was a master craftsman who built the pieces themselves. His defining moment came during an operation in Damascus, where an Israeli asset was trapped in a safe house surrounded by Syrian secret police. Gideon, then a field officer, didn't orchestrate a firefight. He coordinated a citywide power outage, a staged traffic accident involving a fuel tanker, and a false chemical spill alert, creating a 4-minute window of chaos that allowed the asset to walk out of the building and disappear into the panicked crowds. His unique skill was an almost supernatural understanding of system dynamics, how to manipulate the mundane infrastructure of a city to create tactical openings. For this mission, his job was to get the team in and out of Tehran, a city of 9 million people, without a single shot fired. The technical lead was a woman in her early 30s from the Nevaiyat division, Mossad's technology and cyber warfare unit. We'll call her Eliana. She was a prodigy, recruited directly from Unit 8200, the IDF's elite signals intelligence corps. Her legend was born when she single-handedly defeated a complex ransomware attack on Israel's water infrastructure not by decrypting the code, but by identifying a subtle flaw in the attacker's Bitcoin wallet implementation, allowing her to seize their payment address and trace them back to their source. Her skill was creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. She didn't just understand technology. She understood its weaknesses. For the Tehran job, she was responsible for designing the tools, the silent drills, the alarm jammers, and the specialized plasma torches that had to burn through hardened steel without setting the precious paper documents inside the safes on fire. Finally, there was the asset, the source inside Iran. His identity remains one of Mossad's most guarded secrets. He was not a disgruntled scientist or a low-level clerk. He was a senior official, a patriot who had grown to believe his country's leadership was leading it down a path of self-destruction. His past achievement was survival, navigating the treacherous politics of the Iranian regime for decades. His critical skill was his memory and his access. He was the one who, in February 2016, noted the unusual logistics order. He saw thousands of documents and records from the Ministry of Defense being moved not to a secure military bunker, but to a rundown warehouse. He memorized the location, the layout, and even the type of safes being used. He didn't use a camera or computer. He used his mind. He was the key that unlocked the entire operation. These players were operating on a chessboard that was shifting with alarming speed. The year 2015 had seen the signing of the JCPOA, which Israel's government viewed not as a peace treaty, but as a temporary pause that legitimized Iran's nuclear ambitions. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had been its most vocal opponent, even delivering a speech to the U.S. Congress to lobby against it. By 2016, Iran, in compliance with the deal, had dismantled parts of its visible nuclear program. However, intelligence chatter suggested something else was happening in the shadows. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, had rights to visit declared nuclear sites, but there was no mechanism to inspect undeclared locations based on suspicion alone. This was the loophole Iran was exploiting. In February 2016, signals intelligence picked up on a flurry of activity. A massive logistical operation was underway, orchestrated by the IRGC. The operation was codenamed Safekeeper. Convoys of unmarked trucks were moving at night from various military and research sites, all converging on a single, seemingly insignificant point in southern Tehran. This was the genesis of the archive. The Iranians weren't destroying their nuclear history. They were consolidating it, hiding it in a place no inspector would ever think to look. They were preserving the knowledge, the blueprints, the designs for a future breakout. The situation escalated in 2017 with the election of Donald Trump in the United States. Trump had campaigned on a promise to tear up the disastrous Iran deal. Yossi Cohen saw a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The American administration was ideologically aligned with Israel's position, but they needed a pretext, an undeniable smoking gun to justify withdrawing from a multilateral international treaty. A suspicion wasn't enough. An intelligence assessment wasn't enough. They needed physical proof. They needed the archive. Prior incidents underscored the urgency. In 2010 and 2012, Iran's nuclear program had been rocked by the assassinations of several key scientists. While no one claimed responsibility, the attacks were widely attributed to Mossad. These operations, while successful in slowing the program, also made Iran's internal security apparatus paranoid and hyper-vigilant. Any new operation would face a far more sophisticated and brutal counterintelligence response. There was also the memory of a failed infiltration attempt in 2014, an operation that never made headlines. A Mossad team had tried to place a sensor near the Fordow fuel enrichment plant. They were detected and had to be extracted under fire, with one agent severely wounded. The lesson was learned. Brute force was no longer an option. The next major operation had to be invisible, a ghost in the machine. The final trigger for the mission came in early 2017. The high-level asset, the man on the inside, sent a simple, cryptic message through a long, dormant channel. The message was disguised as a quote from a Persian poem, but embedded within it were three key pieces of information. The warehouse was now fully loaded, the security protocols were finalized, and a regular guard shift pattern had been established. The morning shift, he noted, was consistently lazier than the night shift, often arriving 5 to 10 minutes late. That small, human detail, that observation of institutional laziness, became the cornerstone of the entire plan. It defined the operational window. Gideon's team calculated they could rely on a 6-hour and 29-minute window, from the moment the night guard left to the earliest likely arrival of the morning guard. Any longer would be tempting fate. The mission was no longer just a theoretical possibility. It had a timeline. The problem was clear. Retrieve half a ton of paper and digital files from a secret police state fortress in the heart of its capital city, and do it all in less time than it takes to watch a movie trilogy. Cohen presented the plan to Netanyahu. It was audacious, bordering on insane. The risks were immense. If the team was caught, it would be an international crisis of unimaginable proportions. The agents would face certain execution, and Iran would have the ultimate propaganda victory. But the potential reward was even greater. The chance to expose the truth and fundamentally alter the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. Netanyahu, a man known for his appetite for high-risk, high-reward operations, gave his approval. The mission was a go. Project Ahmad moved from the drawing board to a live operation. The insertion was a masterclass in exploiting the mundane. The team didn't parachute in or cross a desert border. They entered Iran as individuals, weeks apart, using expertly forged passports from friendly European nations. Ashkan entered as a Belgian textile machinery salesman. Rami came in as a German auto parts consultant. Barak arrived on a Swiss passport, posing as a tourist interested in Persian architecture. They traveled on commercial flights, their luggage containing nothing more than clothes and business documents. Their operational gear was smuggled into the country piece by piece, hidden in diplomatic pouches and container shipments belonging to front companies that Mossad had established years prior for exactly this purpose. The components of the plasma torches, for instance, were shipped as industrial laser cutting nozzles. The jamming equipment was labeled as telecommunications signal testing hardware. The pieces were collected from a dozen different dead drops across Tehran, each one requiring a complex and nerve-wracking rendezvous. One pickup was from a magnetic box hidden under a specific bench in Mela Park. Another required a brush pass with a clean local asset in the middle of the crowded Tehran Grand Bazaar. A carefully choreographed exchange of identical briefcases that lasted less than 3 seconds. They established their base not in a secretive safe house, but in a rented commercial office in a busy downtown district. The front was a recently formed import-export business dealing in medical supplies. The location was chosen for its anonymity and its high volume of daily traffic. Couriers and trucks came and went all day, allowing the team to move their equipment without raising suspicion. The office itself was nondescript, but behind a false wall in the storage room lay their nerve center. Here, they assembled and tested their gear. Eliana, back in Tel Aviv, had designed the tools to be modular. Rami spent 2 days meticulously assembling the plasma torches, calibrating the gas mixture of argon and hydrogen, and testing the magnetic nozzles that would contain the superheated plasma and prevent it from igniting the warehouse's contents. He ran diagnostics on the torch's cooling system, a closed-loop liquid nitrogen apparatus that was the device's most critical and volatile component. A failure here would mean an explosion. Meanwhile, Barak worked on the surveillance and counter-surveillance gear. He built a detailed radio frequency map of the Shorabad district, identifying every cell phone tower, every police and military broadcast frequency, and every Wi-Fi network. This map was crucial for the jammer. Instead of a brute force blanket jam, which would be easily detectable, Barak's device was programmed for surgical precision. It would target only the specific frequencies used by the alarm system, while leaving all surrounding civilian communications untouched. This required him to physically get close to the warehouse. Posing as a municipal surveyor, complete with a hard hat and a high-visibility vest, he spent a day walking the streets around the target, using a sophisticated spectrum analyzer concealed within a standard surveyor's theodolite. He had one tense moment when an IRGC patrol car slowed down beside him. An officer rolled down the window and asked what he was doing. Barak, speaking flawless Farsi with a regional accent he had practiced for a year, explained he was surveying the land for a new sewage line project, showing them a set of convincing, officially stamped, and utterly fake municipal blueprints. The officer, bored, waved him on. The first phase of intelligence gathering involved confirming the asset's information. Was the archive still there? Had security been upgraded? They couldn't risk a direct approach. Instead, they used a series of long-range, high-tech sensors. From the roof of a building 2 kilometers away, they deployed a laser Doppler vibrometer, a device that measures minute vibrations on a surface. By aiming the invisible laser at the windows of the warehouse, they could analyze the acoustic signatures from within. The data was mostly ambient noise, but by filtering it through complex algorithms, they could detect the low-frequency hum of the climate control systems required to preserve old documents. The archive was still there. Confirmation came in a data burst from Tel Aviv. Climate signature consistent with archival preservation standards. The final piece of the puzzle was confirming the guard patterns. For 2 weeks, a rotating team of local katsas, or field intelligence officers, conducted surveillance. They didn't sit in a van with binoculars. That was amateur hour. One katsa posed as a street food vendor, his cart positioned at a crossroads a kilometer away, giving him a clear view of the main road leading to the warehouse complex. Another worked as a mechanic in a nearby garage, noting every vehicle that passed. Another was a woman who simply jogged the same route through the industrial park every morning at 7 a.m. Their observations were logged, cross-referenced, and analyzed. The pattern held. The night patrol left between Order 20 and Order 30. The morning guard, a man named Jafar, was consistently late. He rarely arrived before Order 7:05, and on 2 occasions, not until 07:12. The operational window was confirmed. The plan was now in motion. The risk was calculated, the team was ready, and the clock was ticking. The technology for the raid was a character in itself, each piece a solution to a seemingly impossible problem. The primary tool was the T-Rex 9000, the internal designation for the plasma torch. It was not a cutting torch in the traditional sense. It was a surgical instrument of immense power. Eliana's team had developed it after studying the schematics for the 32 safes, which the internal asset had managed to glimpse and memorize. The safes were a standard Iranian-made design, the Nader 4, but they had been custom reinforced with a composite alloy of tungsten and manganese steel, specifically to resist thermal attacks. A standard oxyacetylene torch would take hours to penetrate the door and would almost certainly set the contents on fire. The T-Rex operated on a different principle. It didn't melt the metal, it vaporized it. The torch ionized a stream of inert argon gas, then used a focused magnetic field to shape it into a blade of plasma heated to 20,000 degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. The key innovation was the magnetic containment. The plasma blade was surrounded by a magnetic field that prevented it from expanding, keeping the cut incredibly precise, no wider than 2 millimeters. This also served as a heat shield, preventing the intense radiation from damaging the documents inside the safe. The limitation was its power consumption. Each torch was powered by a single-use lithium metal battery pack the size of a briefcase, weighing 25 kilograms. Each battery held just enough power to operate the torch for a total of 12 minutes. With 32 safes to open, every second of burn time was a precious, non-renewable resource. Communication was handled by the Seraph system. Standard encrypted radios were out of the question. Any unusual radio traffic in Tehran, no matter how well encrypted, would trigger an investigation by the IRGC's formidable cyber defense unit. The Seraph system was a laser-based burst transmission device. The terminal in the van would convert data into a modulated infrared laser beam aimed at a low-orbit Mossad satellite passing overhead. The satellite would then relay the message to Tel Aviv. The transmission window for each satellite pass was only 45 seconds, and these occurred only 4 times during the 6-hour operation. This meant Ashkan had to condense his complex status reports into tiny packets of data and have them ready for the exact moment the satellite was in position. It created an inherent tension. The team was completely cut off from their command for long stretches, blind and deaf to the outside world. To breach the door, Rami used a set of tools that looked like something from a science fiction film. After disabling the external locks and the internal bar, he still had to defeat the 200-pound magnetic lock. He attached a device called an EMP Piranha, to the doorframe. It wasn't a wide-area electromagnetic pulse generator, but a focused one. When activated, it would send a single, powerful nanosecond-long pulse of energy directly into the maglock's wiring, overloading its capacitors and momentarily killing the magnetic field. It had to be timed perfectly. Rami would have less than a second to pull the door open before the lock's backup power kicked in. For this, he used a small hydraulic pry bar, its claw already wedged into the door jamb, ready to be activated the instant the EMP fired. The internal surveillance inside the warehouse was another major hurdle. The asset had reported the presence of motion sensors and infrared cameras. Barak's solution was a device nicknamed the Ghost. Before opening the door, he would slide a thin, flexible fiber optic cable under it. On the end of the cable was a multi-spectrum emitter. The Ghost would map the location of the motion sensors and then project a static loop of the empty warehouse back at them. To the security system, it would appear as if the room was still empty and quiet. For the IR cameras, the device would measure the ambient temperature of the room and then project a corresponding thermal image, effectively making the team invisible to heat sensors. The limitation of the Ghost was its processing power. It could only loop a static image. Any unexpected event inside the warehouse, a piece of paper falling, a rat running across the floor, would break the illusion and trigger the alarm. The team had to move with balletic precision, in a space they had never physically been in before. The first major setback struck at a 1:15. Rami had successfully opened the first two safes. The T-Rex torch performed flawlessly, its searing white blade slicing through the half-inch steel doors in under 90 seconds each. The documents inside were pristine, untouched by the heat. Ashkan was in the process of packing the first set of black binders, marked with a red triangle indicating top priority, warhead designs. Then, as Rami started the cut on the third safe, it happened. A high-pitched crack echoed in the cavernous space, followed by a shower of sparks. The plasma blade flickered and died. "Status," Ashkan whispered into his throat mic, his voice calm, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding his system. "Nozzles fractured," Rami hissed back, pulling the torch away from the safe. "Micro fissure in the ceramic housing. It can't maintain magnetic containment. The unit is dead." 32 safes. One torch down, one to go. They had a backup T-Rex, but the plan had called for using both simultaneously to meet the timeline. Ashkan did the math in his head. Their cutting time had just doubled. Their carefully constructed 6-hour schedule was now impossible. They would have to leave at least a third of the safes unopened. "Tel Aviv, this is Ashkan." He sub-vocalized into his mic, preparing the message for the next satellite pass, which was still 40 minutes away. "Primary torch is down. Repeat, primary torch is non-operational. We are proceeding with secondary only. Impossible to clear all targets. Awaiting revised priority list." But they couldn't wait 40 minutes. They had to make a decision now. Leaving the most valuable intelligence behind was not an option. Ashkan scanned the room. The safes were arranged in 4 rows of 8. He ran to the far wall where Barak was monitoring the Ghost system, ensuring the sensor loops remained stable. "Barak, I need a new plan. We have 1 torch. Maximum burn time is now 12 minutes total. We can probably open 10, maybe 12 more safes if we push it. Which ones?" Barak didn't hesitate. He pulled up the initial intel from their asset on his wrist-mounted display. It contained a crude, hand-drawn map of the warehouse, with certain safes marked. The asset said the most critical material, the crown jewels, as he called them, were concentrated. He believed they were in these 2 rows. He pointed to the rows on the left. But he wasn't certain of the distribution. It was a calculated guess. It was a gamble. They could spend their remaining time on those 16 safes and still miss the core of the archive. Ashkan made the call. We stick to the assets intel. We focus on these 2 rows. We cut until the battery dies or the clock runs out. Move. Now. Rami, already unpacking the second torch, nodded grimly and moved to the next safe in the designated row. The pace became frantic. Every movement was optimized, every second shaved. As Rami cut, Ashkan and Barak would stand ready, pulling the heavy steel plug free the instant the cut was complete, grabbing the contents and moving to the next. The second major complication arrived at 0342. It was far worse than an equipment failure. Barak, whose eyes had been flicking between his sensor loop monitor and a display showing external radio frequencies, suddenly froze. Vehicle, he breathed. 200 meters and closing. Standard IRGC patrol vehicle. Not on the schedule. A ghost patrol. An unscheduled random check. The worst possible luck. Kill the light, Ashkan commanded. Rami immediately shut down the torch. The warehouse was plunged back into absolute blackness. The only light the faint red and green status indicators on their equipment. Time to arrival? 90 seconds, maybe less. There was nowhere to hide. The warehouse was a single, large room filled with metal safes. Hold, Ashkan said, his voice barely a whisper. No movement, no sound. Barak, are the loops holding? So far. But if they have handheld thermal, they'll see us. The ghost can't block a direct scan through the walls. The team froze in place. Ashkan could hear the blood pounding in his ears. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate, a technique learned over 20 years of fieldwork. He heard the faint crunch of tires on gravel outside. The vehicle was slowing down. A spotlight beam cut through the grimy windows, sweeping across the interior of the warehouse. The beam passed over them, the light reflecting off the metal safes. For a heart-stopping moment, Ashkan was sure the light would catch the fresh cut marks on the steel, the telltale sign of a break-in. The beam moved on. The ghost's projection was holding. The IRGC soldiers outside would see an empty, undisturbed room. The sound of a car door opened, then another. Voices. Muffled, but clearly audible through the thin metal walls. They were speaking Farsi. One voice was complaining about the cold. The other laughed. Barak held up a hand, indicating 2 individuals. Ashkan's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment of truth. Would they be satisfied with a visual check from the outside? Or would they decide to come in for a closer look? The seconds stretched into an eternity. He could hear the crunch of boots on the gravel just outside the personnel door they had entered through. A hand jiggled the doorknob. It was locked, of course, but they were testing it. One of the soldiers muttered something. The other replied. Then, silence. For a full minute, there was no sound. Ashkan strained his ears. Had they seen something? Were they calling for backup? Then he heard it again. A car door slamming shut, the engine starting, the crunch of tires pulling away. The patrol was leaving. They had been outside for a total of 4 agonizing minutes. Ashkan waited another full 2 minutes before giving the all clear. They're gone. Barak, confirm. Confirmed. Vehicle is leaving the district. Status report, Ashkan snapped. We lost 6 minutes. We have 2 hours and 10 minutes to exfil. The torch has 7 minutes of burn time left. That's maybe 5 more safes. The pressure was immense, but the team's training took over. The near disaster had only sharpened their focus. "Let's make them count," Ashkan said. Rami ignited the torch again, its brilliant white light a defiant roar in the silence. 04:55. The final safe door was cut. The T-Rex torch's battery indicator blinked red, completely depleted. They had managed to open a total of 16 safes, half of the archive. Dozens of black binders and 183 data CDs were now packed into specially designed, hardened cases. The total weight was nearly half a ton. It was more than they had anticipated. "This is too much for a clean exfil," Barak said, straining as he lifted one of the cases. "The plan was for man-portable packs. This requires a vehicle, a big one." Ashkan was already on it, preparing the next data burst. "Tel Aviv, Ashkan. Archive secured. Total weight 500 kilograms. Repeat, 500. Exfil plan compromised. We cannot carry this weight. We need a truck. Now." The message was sent. A desperate plea shot into the heavens. The reply came an hour later, just as they were preparing to destroy their equipment. It was 2 words: Sunrise Transport. Ashkan understood immediately. It was a contingency plan, a high-risk option they had hoped to avoid. Sunrise Transport was a front company, a legitimate shipping business whose owner was a Mossad asset. A truck from this company would be dispatched for a routine pickup at a neighboring warehouse at 06:30. Their job was to intercept it. 06:15. The team moved the heavy cases to the warehouse's large roll-up door. This was the point of no return. Opening this door would be loud and obvious. They had one shot. Rami attached shaped charges to the door's locking mechanism. 06:28. Through a crack in the door, Ashkan saw the truck, a beat-up Isuzu flatbed, rumbling down the service road. It was slowing, preparing to turn into the warehouse next door. "Now," Ashkan ordered. Rami hit the detonator. The charges blew with a series of sharp, contained cracks. Barak and Ashkan threw their weight against the heavy door, pushing it up just enough to start sliding the cases underneath. The truck driver, a middle-aged man who didn't even glance in their direction, brought the truck to a halt perfectly alongside their position. The team worked with frantic speed, heaving the cases onto the flatbed. It took them less than 60 seconds. "Go," Ashkan said to the driver. The driver nodded once, put the truck in gear, and drove away, never exceeding the speed limit. 06:31. As the truck disappeared down the road, the team slipped back out through the personnel door. Their work was done. Their extraction was now a separate problem. They had to split up, melt back into the city, and follow their individual exfiltration protocols over the next 48 hours. 07:08. A security guard named Jafar arrived for his morning shift at the Shorabad Industrial Complex. He was 8 minutes late. He noticed the broken lock on the personnel door of Warehouse 312. He cautiously pushed it open. He saw the gaping, scorched holes in the 2 rows of safes. He saw the discarded tools, intentionally left behind to be found. He didn't understand what he was looking at, but he knew it was bad. He fumbled for his radio. The alarm was raised. Within minutes, the area was swarming with IRGC soldiers and intelligence agents. A nationwide manhunt was declared. All borders were put on high alert. Tens of thousands of security personnel were mobilized to find the perpetrators. But they were chasing ghosts. The agents were gone. The archive was gone. The fallout was immediate and seismic. In Tehran, chaos erupted within the intelligence community. The breach was a profound and humiliating failure. How could a team penetrate the capital, steal half a ton of the nation's most sensitive secrets, and vanish without a trace? Heads rolled. Senior commanders in the IRGC's counterintelligence division were arrested. A wave of paranoia swept through the regime as they began an internal witch hunt, searching for the mole who had made it all possible. The nationwide manhunt turned up nothing. The decoy trucks that Yossi Cohen had arranged, driving in different directions out of Tehran, successfully diverted and confused Iranian intelligence, splitting their resources and leading them on a series of wild goose chases. The real truck, carrying the archive, followed its planned route, its mundane appearance its best camouflage. It crossed the border into Azerbaijan, where the contents were transferred to an Israeli cargo plane and flown directly to Tel Aviv. 3 months later, on April 30, 2018, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stood before the world's media in a televised address. Behind him was a screen, and beside him, a shelf stacked high with the black binders and CDs. "Tonight," he announced, "we're going to show you something that the world has never seen before." He revealed the existence of the archive, presenting the stolen documents as irrefutable proof that Iran had lied about its nuclear program. He showed blueprints for a nuclear warhead, documents detailing warhead integration onto Shahab-3 missiles, and plans for a series of underground nuclear tests. The impact was exactly what Yossi Cohen had intended. On May 8, 2018, just 8 days after Netanyahu's presentation, President Donald Trump announced that the United States was withdrawing from the JCPOA. The archive provided the smoking gun he needed, validating his decision in the eyes of his supporters and allies. The operation was hailed in Israel as one of the greatest intelligence coups in history, a mission that was perfect in its planning and execution. The final twist, the true legacy of the operation, was buried deep within the stolen data, a secret known only to a handful of people in Mossad's headquarters. The primary mission was indeed the nuclear archive. But there was a secondary, and perhaps even more important, objective. Hidden inside one of the binders, tucked into a sleeve meant for engineering diagrams, was not a blueprint for a bomb, but a simple accountant's ledger. This ledger had nothing to do with physics or missile telemetry. It detailed a secret, off-the-books payment system. It listed dozens of names. Some were high-ranking Iranian officials who had taken bribes to look the other way. But the most explosive names were those of several prominent European scientists, businessmen, and shell corporations who had secretly provided Iran with the specialized technology and materials needed for its weapons program, bypassing international sanctions for profit. The archive was the public victory, the weapon used to shatter the nuclear deal. The ledger was the silent victory, a weapon of immense blackmail potential and counter-proliferation leverage. It gave Israel the ability to quietly neutralize key nodes in Iran's international supply chain, to sow discord and mistrust among its enemies, and to identify and monitor other scientists worldwide who might be tempted to sell their knowledge to the highest bidder. The 2018 raid was not just about stealing the past. It was about controlling the future. It revealed that the true battleground was not just in secret underground bunkers, but in the quiet, mundane world of accounting ledgers, shipping manifests, and the compromised loyalties of men who believed their secrets were safe. The half-ton of documents told the story of a nuclear program, but the single, hidden ledger told a much more dangerous story of human greed and betrayal, a story that continues to unfold in the shadows.